away from his writing is that socialists and socialism is a very selfish form of government. Everything is controlled by the state, and the socialist will offer all sorts of solutions to problems to get the public on board. It will do nothing to actually solve those problems. And I think Uyghur here, Seneca Uyghur, you're right, I can't pronounce his name either. This guy is obviously an incredible socialist here, and what he says is restore true representative democracy in the United States by pressuring our state representatives to pass a much-needed 28th Amendment in our Constitution, which would end corporate personhood and publicly finance all elections in our country. And I just want to read what their official position is here. Corporations are not people. They have none of the constitutional rights of human beings. Corporations are not allowed to give money to any politician directly or indirectly, and no politician can raise over $100 from any person or entity. All elections must be publicly financed. Now, I am of two minds on the Supreme Court decision considering Citizens United, and corporations are not individuals. I agree with that. However, they do have a certain status because of who they are, and they have a certain status as far as representation is concerned. However, Wolfpack wants to deny companies from having any say in the political process. So what is to stop a future organization like Wolfpack from not only stopping companies and corporations from having representation, but maybe having the John Birch Society not being represented, or me, or you?
We are incorporated under Massachusetts general law. In our state, if you raise more than $250 towards a candidate, you have to incorporate. So it's going to change a whole lot of laws, and it sounds appealing. These faceless corporations, Citizens United, they made a video, a documentary about Hillary Clinton. That's what they were against. Wolfpack is a political pact set up for one reason only, for Article 5 prevention. But its parent is Young Turks. Young Turks is
Isn't that a corporation? Isn't that a company?
Well, the difference is, it's media. And George Soros is the funder of Young Turks. Now, why would Soros, who dumps tons of money into the political realm, and through his various entities, media consortium?
But this is what I'm saying about socialism being selfish. It's okay for them.
Right.
It's just not okay for you.
But that would be the corporate media. Right. The corporate media would have unlimited time where the conservative voice is not as loud. That's why they have to form groups like Citizens United and make documentaries. And also the federal, taxpayer support of elections. That means the governments, the state and federal government, will determine what a viable candidate is. That's how dangerous that is. So you want to run for office, you have to jump off all these hoops. You're not a viable candidate. Now, there was a man that just won down in Virginia in the primary.
Certainly.
He was not, no doubt, he probably would not have met the description of a viable candidate under any potential law. How many people get elected? And it also discourages a lot of people from even trying to get elected. Because some states have these what they call, not free elections, but clean elections, where they have to get so many donations, a $5 donation from 100 people before they can even operate. And it's just more restrictions.
In fact,
actually, it will give the establishment a monopoly. And here's this Cenk Uygur coming across like some kind of populist. He's being sponsored by one of the top insiders in the world.
That's right.
Is that so hypocritical?
It is. It's completely hypocritical. One of the things, you had mentioned earlier about being on the Meat and Potato Show. One of the things that I have done since 2008, I've done this for years, is I do my candidate interview series during the entire election process. And I have had the pleasure of interviewing some of the most interesting, intelligent people, and they all know this, who didn't have a snowball's chance in hell of winning.
Right.
But I purposely interviewed them and purposely sought them out because nobody else would talk to them. Nobody else. I've even interviewed LaRouche Democrats. Why? Because when I go to try to get other Democrats to come onto the show, they won't come onto the show. But the LaRouche people will come on. So you're damn sure I'm going to have them on the show if they're going to answer my invite. Of course they are. Mark Callahan out in Oregon. He was featured on Fox News. He's the guy that was thrown out of the Willamette Weekly interview. That went viral all over the web. He's been on my show several times. Colonel Reeser down in Texas, he's been on my show. Jason Ravnsborg in South Dakota has been on the show, and that's just this year alone. None of these people, even in their own states, people are like, who are these people?
That's
But
right.
because I interview them, I put them on the video, and I make it viral, it's like, oh, check this video out.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, it's they're getting some traction. But that brings me back to what
The
you just said
Republican
about
Party was a third party, wasn't it? At one time.
Exactly. But brings me back to what you said about who determines who a viable candidate is. Every single one of these people that I've interviewed all the way back to 2008 have had the same problem.
That's right.
Is that they can't get money from the Republican Party because the Republican Party has already picked their favorite child.
That's right.
It's unbelievable.
That's right.
Let's, again here, from the magazine here, even if you support having the Senate in addition to the House of Representatives, do you support as well giving Wyoming the same number of votes as California, which has roughly 7 times the population? And that's from Sanford Levinson there.
That's the populist notion that they want to do away with the Electoral College. That's another big threat. See, the states created the federal government. At the convention in 1789, there was a big issue between large states and small states, and I think it was called the New Jersey Plan, where the small states said, we'll have no say in this national government if if we don't have, what's the safeguard here? We would be voted down every single time, because we're just going to send a couple of delegates to the legislature, where the big populated states will have a lot more say.
Certainly, but
So the argument was, well, we'll tell you what, we'll make a compromise. We'll have 2 senators from each state. There will always be 2. And then the Congress, the House of Representatives, will be based on population. And not only that, but the state legislators chose the members of Congress, of the Senate. And it worked out pretty well. The Electoral College, simply each state has so many votes, and that's the way it should be. So it's based on the member of congressional delegation.
Exactly.
In some states, the minimum would be 3. And I think it works very well for us. And so I don't think we should change it. But these folks want to turn this whole notion, they want to give us almost this socialist democracy. That's what they're pushing.
Exactly. And speaking of that word democracy, it's mentioned all these people, I don't mean the authors in the magazine, but everybody that they're talking about, they keep using that term over and over again, American democracy. If we want to save the democracy, folks, we're not a democracy.
They can't even define
They can't even
government.
exactly.
Now, if you go to, I recommend the viewers to go to a website called conconcon.org.
Right.
This is the website that has all the information that happened in September 2011 in Harvard, as the various workshops, the lectures, and they say democracy is stalled. But to me, that's a good thing, because we're a republic.
We're not supposed to be a
And the republic is ruled by law, where the whims of the majority cannot infringe upon the minority. When I say minority, I'm speaking not necessarily of a particular group of people, a racial minority, but minority in general. So our founding fathers have been very, very clear on republics and democracies. James Madison, Federalist Papers number 10, said that democracies have everywhere been spectacles of turbulence and contention, short in their lives and violent in their deaths.
And I've said that socialism has the longest history of having the shortest history in history. It's always been around, but it's only been around for a short time.
That's right. That's right. And so what we need to do is we need to help, our job is to create informed voters, and you don't need every single person to be informed. You just have enough to make a difference in an election. And to give you an example, each congressional district has about 650,000 citizens, give or take. Out of that figure, half of them are eligible to vote. So now we're at 325,000. Out of that figure, half of them may turn out for election. And out of that number, 10%, 5% make a difference. So if we focus on informing those people, we do it through, in our magazine we have something called the Freedom Index, where you can look at your member of Congress and how he or she votes, both the Senate and the House. And it's surprising, you think, well, gee, this person's a real conservative, you look at the voting record, like Scott Brown, for example.
Like tell a different story.
Scott Brown voted with John Kerry most of the time.
Sure.
With one of you, so John Kerry would get a 20 on an index of 0 to 100, and Scott Brown gets a 40. Well, if I came home from school with a 40 on my test, No, my mother wasn't going to be very happy.
Exactly, right.
Well, but little Johnny only got a 20. Well, I don't care what Johnny got. You better go back and learn. So our job is to create that informed electorate, and when we do that, we will see real change under the Constitution. Now, right now, we are probably about 10 to 11 states away from an Article 5 convention. So here it is, June of 2014. We were able to beat back some calls, some that we won surprisingly. In Virginia, for example, Utah. Virginia is the headquarters of the Convention of the States. And Arizona is the headquarters of the Goldwater Institute. We were able to beat it back in these two states. We were able to rescind from about late 1990s to 2010, our members, not exclusively, but primarily, were able to rescind calls for Article 5 conventions in about 17 states. I'm talking about all the calls. There's some calls that go back to 1789, and we are concerned that these old calls may be used as legitimate new calls, or legitimate, still viable. And if we hadn't done that, we may have been already in an Article 5. We may have been that close. But a number of states have since passed new calls, and for example, Vermont passed a fresh call. It was actually the left-wing version of the call, the Wolfpack call. We beat back a call in New Hampshire, the Wolfpack call, but they have a live call for a balanced budget amendment in 2012. So again, right now, 21 to 23 states. Some people say every call is valid, therefore we should have one already. Now, April of 2014, there was something called the Congressional Research Service. There was a 26-page report. It was very unbiased. It just said, what's the situation here? And they say that Congress may not recognize any calls over 7 years of age, 7 years old. They may not recognize any call that isn't identical, even if it's calling for like a balanced budget amendment, but its wording is different. We don't know that. See, it's pure speculation. Congress can say, hey, we're calling right now. Congress may say, no, we're not satisfied by these calls. But regardless of that, our job is to get all of the old calls rescinded here in Massachusetts, and we're looking for, in all states, looking for those who will sponsor resolutions to rescind all calls, because you know, as soon as the new session sits next January, there's going to be a bunch of calls for Article 5. Now this group, these are very well-funded people. The Article 5 Convention, Convention of the States, the ALEC, the Goldwater Institute, and on the left you've got Move to Amend, you've got the Wolfpack. They're getting a lot of fun. They're getting a lot of money to do this. They're hiring staff people. We're kind of a small organization. I cover 6 states as a full-time staff member. So we rely on, of course, primarily on our volunteers.
Volunteers and donations.
And we've been able to do a whole lot. I mean, when you go to their websites of those who promote one, we're public enemy number 1.
Exactly, you're definitely going to. Yeah, you've been something like that. In the article that said something about 40 plus years you guys have been practically fighting.
Well,
just this issue.
We got involved in this in the 83, 84. Phyllis Schlafly's group people before him kind of predated us. And I think there was a lot of people advocating amendments, not that they wanted an Article 5, but they thought it'd scare Congress into action. Well, it's like playing Russian roulette. In fact, back in the 70s, after the Roe versus Wade, that repealed all the state's laws against abortion, there was some pro-life folks said, it's worth the risk. Let's see if we can have an Article 5 to repeal Roe versus Wade. And they got a number of states, about 20 states, and it was by 82 or 83. I think they realized that they're not going to get any more states. They definitely don't have 3/4, 38 states.
Sure.
So they decided not to go that route anymore. Again, I know there's a lot of people out there. They're enamored by these talk show hosts. You've got guys like Beck, guys like Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, and then they hear us.
But these guys aren't qualified to call for something like that. But they are, though.
Well, this was interesting.
He's like this Uyghur here. He's spearheading it. He's not qualified.
This is what, if you're a legal scholar that happens to support one, you are esteemed. But if you're not, your credentials are questioned. I'll give you an example. Charles Rice, professor former professor, dean of Notre Dame Law School, he came out against it. And he wrote about why he opposes it. And one of the Convention of States supporters said, what are his credentials? Well, what has he written on Article 5? Well, let's look at Mike Farris. Mike Farris, his specialty is homeschool and family law. Nothing, that's good stuff. But he's no more an expert in Article 5 than, than the real estate agent, Mark Meckler, who was a Russian real estate attorney. That's his specialty. And that's a complicated law. And my hat's off to people who study that. But it doesn't make him an expert. But what makes him an expert is because he wants an Article 5 convention, therefore he's an expert.
Unbelievable. Let's move on here. Common Core, absolutely fantastic tour with Dr. Pesco.
Yes, right.
How many cities did you guys end up hitting in this area?
Well, now we're talking about June 7th. We did North Reading, Massachusetts, Quincy, Massachusetts, Keene, New Hampshire, Hollis, New Hampshire, Wyndham, New Hampshire, Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. Then leave one out. And I think we got them all. Plus, we got some radio, live in-studio radio.
Yep, I shared you did a thing in your living room, I think it was, with Dr.
Oh, that was in my living room. I wish my living room had that nice, it was nicer looking.
Yeah, that was a flat screen.
Yeah, what we did was, Common Core, because we discussed a lot about Agenda 21, Common Core and Agenda 20 were sort of tandem.
Exactly.
And, but as I mentioned earlier.
Yes, educate my audience, please.
Well, Common Core is something, was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the goal is a total takeover of education, federal education, formal takeover. And it was being promoted by the Department of Education, the federal level. And this race to the top that was passed by the Obama administration, they said to the states, you take Common Core, we'll give you this money.
Right.
But you have to take it seen.
You have to take
it. 46 states took it. And that's just another example. People will say that, the supporters of Article 5 will say that states will never do anything unreasonable. At least not 38 states. You still have that 11.
46 that took the Common Core money.
46 took the Common Core money. Every state has been implementing some aspect of Agenda 21. It's only been recently that there's been some pushback, and several states have passed resolutions or laws to say, get it out. And it's not completely out of these states.
We've got, well, here's the thing, too, about Common Core. It's 1965, I think it's 1970, and
well, 65
79.
was the Johnson, when Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society programs that.
What these three separate laws are is that the federal government cannot intervene in the local curriculum. But this is what Common Core is doing.
Well, what they did is that we didn't write it. Well, look who's copywritten it.
I know, that's the shell game.
Oh, it's incredible.
It's a wicked shell game.
I mean, if I contracted you to do a certain service and they said, gee, I don't care for that, that he had nothing to do with it. I just paid him to write it. Well, it's still a program. It's still your program.
Right. That's unbelievable how they slid that in there.
And now you're seeing people on both sides of the spectrum. And and like the Article 5, there's always been people on the left-wing side against it as well as the right-wing side. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're working together, we're compromising our views. In the history of the Article 5 movement, in the 80s, 70s and 80s, you had the ACLU opposing Article 5 convention. You had the NEA, the NRA, the American Legion, and many others. In fact, I brought this just for illustration here. I'm not going to read it to you because it will take me a little while. But this is a 1,300 plus page report from a 1979 hearing in the U.S. Senate. See, the U.S. Senate thinks that they have they're supposed to be able to control an Article 5 convention. There are no laws, no rules, anything right now guiding them at all. We've never had one. Some of these supporters say that, well, we'll set the ground rules before we go in. In fact, just in Indianapolis, Indiana, they had about 100 legislators from about 33 different states, mostly conservative types. Well, we're going to work on some ground rules. Well, that's all well and good. The minute they convene, they can take those rules and say it's granted.
Of course
They can take that state resolution and said, if you don't do this, we're going to put you in jail. So what? Put me in jail. Oh, appeal that to the Supreme, the 50-member Supreme Court that we're going to vote. So, and if I'm going to rewrite the Constitution, I'll be happy to take a 6-month suspended sentence. If I'm in, so that's a waste. That's totally useless. So anyway, Orrin Hatch, was the one that presided over this. He was very much in favor, as he still is. And nothing was ever passed. But boy, there's a lot of great stuff. In fact, this particular document, it's in the Worcester Library. Not too many places have it. It's in my library, but it also was out of print, but I was able to put it online. I was able to have a good friend of mine that scanned it into his printer. Yeah. And you will see people, professors from both sides of the spectrum that appeared as at hearings. They said, bar the door, don't have a convention. And they used the one, that's what they were afraid of. In fact, the NAACP passed a resolution, a copy that's in here. So, in fact, if viewers are watching, you can probably leave my contact information.
Certainly, yeah.
I have it on, I have a scribd.com page, and you'll find it on there if they're interested in just, but some of these supporters of an Article 5, like Mark Meckler, he wrote an article back late last year, or early this year, 2014, and he said the only people that have opposed this were fringe groups and so forth. Back in the 70s, well, whatever a fringe group is. Sometimes he used the term well-funded fringe group.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of people that had a lot to say about an Article 5. He probably never knew this existed. And you'd find this information mostly in law journals. Most people don't read law journals. Even most lawyers probably don't read law journals. So, so that's why it's important.
That's
for
amazing.
history. Yeah.
That is amazing. How about the claim that the Supreme Court has the final say regarding the constitutionality of federal laws or edicts, I'm sorry. Thomas Jefferson had something to say about that matter. In 1804, he wrote that giving the Supreme Court power to declare unconstitutional acts of the legislature or executive, quote, would make the judiciary a despotic branch. He noted that nothing in the Constitution gives the Supreme Court that right. Now, there's nothing that gives Obamacare or even Common Core.
That's right.
There's nothing in the Constitution, yet the Supreme Court may go ahead. Think about what they did with they called it not a fine, it is a tax. Never mind the fact that it came out of the Senate first.
And by the way,
House.
Republican, the Roberts, a Republican conservative,
I suppose.
well, he should have just overturned it and threw it out. But
All they're doing is breaking laws up there in Washington.
The Supreme
That's
Court-
all they're doing now.
the Supreme Court, this is one of the arguments too of Article 5 supporters, the Supreme Court's run away and so forth. The only way to rein them in is to an Article 5. Well, no, that's not the case. A Supreme Court justice can be impeached. It's only happened once, and that person back in 1801 or 1802, and he was not removed, but he was impeached. But we've never had an Article 5. It's a whole lot easier to impeach. It's just good behavior. So they sit there for as long as they're behaving properly, and that's sort of what does that mean? Well, if they're coming across these crazy decisions, then that's not good behavior. But also, Article 3, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution says that Congress can limit the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court.
Sure.
They've done that a few times. They did that with labor laws. So a labor law will not go to the Supreme Court. So you don't have to have an Article 5 convention or even impeach a Supreme Court justice. You can just make sure that they cannot hear anything comes out of this particular law.
Interesting.
And it's something that's there, and all you need is a majority of both House and Senate.
Simple.
A majority of those present.
Yeah.
So if you have 51% of 51, in the Senate, for example. So that's the remedy for that. And they're not using that remedy.
I was at the city council meeting twice. They were discussing
This is Worcester, not Worcester, Massachusetts.
in Worcester.
Yeah.
Yeah, city council in Worcester. Twice I watched them, and it's on film. It's on my YouTube channel. They quite literally were talking about, well, the NDAA isn't our responsibility. It's not our job to not support it. Never mind the fact that the group that was there, Rutland, Oxford. How's the other town? There's another town out there. Charlton, I think it was, that their city councils had said, no, we're not going to uphold NDAA. We don't want this in our town. We're not going to
You're getting nullification is where you're coming from, right?
We're talking about nullification.
Another very important aspect. The states created the federal government. The 10th Amendment basically says that...
Thank you for segueing.
Oh, that's okay.
He knows where I was going.
Yeah, the 10th Amendment says that there's certain things that, certain powers not granted to the state, not denied to the states,
Right.
or granted to the federal government are left up to the states.
And to the people themselves.
Or to the people, right. So that's, and nullification has been used, and when you use that term, guys like Mark Levin will say, you're a neo-Confederate if you believe in nullification. Well, states
Nullification is very important.
States nullified the Slavery Act, the Fugitive Slave Act that predated the Civil War. The Real ID Act that Congress passed back in 08, 07, 06, somewhere around there, they said that every state had to comply with these basically national ID cards with a driver's license. New Hampshire was the first state to say, hell no, we won't go. And I don't know, there's been about 20 other states that took that route. So what did Congress say? Well, we'll give you a few more years, and it's been a few more years. Some states have complied, others have not, and they haven't molested those states. So yes, we have no other remedy. If members of Congress are going to vote the wrong way and impose tyranny, that states don't have to do that.
Certainly, right.
And you don't have to wait for an Article 5 convention that will probably take 2 years to be held and maybe 6 to 10 years before anything can come out of that. Meanwhile, we get spy cameras, we get taxes, we have undeclared wars, we have an runaway Congress, we have a declared debt of 17, 18 trillion.
Yeah.
You know, but we have elections every 2 years, you see.
And we can vote them out.
And you can vote them out, and well, we've tried that, it doesn't work. Well, you've got to keep trying. And it does work. Could you imagine if we didn't have elections every 2 years? We'd already be in total tyranny.
Well, the other thing too is our country has morally just gone completely off the rails. Getting back to Skousen's book and the things that he talks about the importance of having, I'm going to use the word religion, and I know people, they freak out about that today.
Well, they shouldn't freak out because if they understand
But that's what we
principles,
need. We need to
we
have...
weren't founded by Muslims. We weren't founded by
founded
atheists.
by the hand of providence.
We were founded
by
by...
and the founders.
That's right. They were men of
Everything was
Christian
God.
faith.
Washington, I read that in the book. Washington counted over something like 62 or 63 times during the Revolution where it was this close to have the whole thing. Total failure.
Yeah.
62 times, but he kept insisting. He says, I kept praying, and it was only by the hand of providence. He doesn't use the word God. That's the other thing about
that meant God. That was the term that was used for God.
It's an Anglo-Saxon term meaning the ultimate good. But they always use the word providence, the guiding hand of divine providence.
John Adams is my second favorite founding father next to George Washington. He wrote a letter to the militia unit in Massachusetts, and it was after he was president. He was probably 1798 or so when it was dated. And he said that this Constitution is for a religious and moral people only. It is wholly inadequate
for any other nation.
For any other.
Right.
And this is why we're having a problem. And you look at the moral decline in our nation. And sometimes, where is it more apparent? In the churches themselves. When you go to one of these so-called gay pride rallies and you see half the people who belong to some kind of church, they're out there. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a big issue too. And we can have all kinds of laws passed, all kinds of elections, all kinds of Tea Party rallies, but if we can't get our act together morally, it's a waste of time. Morality and freedom are inseparable.
Exactly. And
I don't care. And I have a lot of libertarian friends, and most of them are morally upright people. You can't enforce people, you can't make people be good, but the laws reflect a culture. Exactly. And when laws change, as much as they've been changing lately, it shows our culture is in decline.
It is.
And how many generations do we have left if we don't reverse that? I don't know. I mean, I know people were calling it, when Mary Goldwater wasn't reelected, they thought it was the end of the world.
Well, I just finished another piece in my blog. I was talking again about Common Core, that you already look at the dumbing down of our educational system now. I think my generation, you know, I'm 50 years, you said you were what, 55? 55, I'm 50 years old. I think our generation was probably the last generation to get I'm not going to use the word a faith-based education, but we weren't afraid to talk about God. We weren't afraid to, I remember prayer in school. I remember that when I was a little child. I remember that. I think we were the last generation to see that. We are now several generations past where the dumbing down of our education system, I mean, we quite literally now have, and please don't take this the wrong way, audience, we now have dumbed down parents because they went to the dumbed down education, having dumbed down kids themselves. You see what I'm saying? Going to schools. So we're already past that. I think we're losing the generation.
Let me add to the dumb down is that we have 3 generations of statists-minded people.
Yes.
The government, the humanists are the ones that under John Dewey. John Dewey, the father of progressive education. I hate to use the word progressive when it comes to socialism. There's nothing progressive.
There's nothing progressive about
socialism.
Well, they changed the names to protect the guilty.
That's right. So he said we have to use the classrooms as a preacher uses a pulpit. So what we have in essence are state-run schools, government-controlled schools, and those government-controlled schools are turning out little government advocates of big government. That's the nature. If you send your child to a parochial school, a Catholic school, the product would be somebody who has a Catholic worldview. That's the purpose of that. If I send my child to a Baptist school, you hope they'd come out with a Christian Baptist type. That's the purpose of it. You send your child to a humanist school, which is a public school or government school, the result has to be a humanist mindset. You can't have any other. So if I expose my child to evolution, socialism, moral degeneracy, 5 days a week, 7 or 8 months out of the year, 9 months out of the year, what would I expect?
Exactly. Sure.
And I can't stand these parents who will say, oh, they come home and they call me a fascist because I don't recycle. That's funny. I deprogram them. Really? You have them for what, 1 or 2 hours of quality time a week?
Yeah.
And they have them, the socialists have them the rest of the
8 hour days.
Then they have the control of the mass media, so they're watching it. You watch a movie, you think, oh, it's a cute little movie, and they always inject. There was something we watched yesterday, just a few minutes, and they were promoting. It was a nice little, sweet, harmless little boy giving a speech about W.E.B. Du Bois, like he was some kind of great. I said, this guy we joined the Communist Party. I said, that's the kind of people. That's what you get. Exactly. So even in this, where you don't even expect it, you get it. Or you watch a scene in a movie, and there's something about global warming. You don't see a lot of flags. You see a lot of global warming or some other type of leftist propaganda stuck in there.
Exactly. So what's next for you? What's next for?
Well, we've got to
finish up the Dr. Pesta thing. That's all done, right?
That's right.
So what's next? What's happening?
I'll be out on the road later on this next week, speaking to groups in Vermont and New Hampshire. I was up in Maine this week. We actually visited the Maine State House. They're out of session. So I stopped in there and I thought I'll just leave some of these reprints off, and I ran into the head of the Republican Party and the Senate Republican leader, and he said, "Yep, I don't like this, it's a bad idea." So that's what we're going to do, and we encourage your viewers give me a call. I'm right here. I'm right in Boston.
Yeah, I'll post everything up.
I'm on. This is my full-time job. And I don't want to be like the Maytag Repair Man sitting around in my office and not getting the phone calls, but we're out and about, and we're coming up. In July we have a summer camp.
How long have you been a Verger?
I joined in 1988. Yeah.
Really?
And I've been on staff since 1990.
Have you always been more conservative constitutionalist your whole life?
Well,
I went through a catharsis. I was raised by quite literally a Kennedy liberal mother. And it
by the
took
way,
me
a
a long
Kennedy liberal today is a moderate conservative.
I mean, I was raised in a left house.
Well, I remember,
I
think I was in 6th grade, and the teacher made reference to Joseph McCarthy in a negative context. And I asked why was he a bad man? And she said, well, he was mean to communists. And I thought, well, what's wrong with that? Because I remember reading about communist guerrillas killing Americans in Vietnam, and I said, how could these poor Americans fight these guerrillas? I was thinking not the French guerre, but I was thinking about guerrillas. You know, the big hairy ones.
Right.
So I was always and my dad had a drugstore in the Hyde Park section of Boston, and we were robbed quite often. And this is late 60s.
Yeah, the Hyde Park area was bad during that time.
And we saw the people getting away. They'd arrest these folks. The state rep would be defending. He was also an attorney defending the bad guys. And my father was the evil capitalist, a little mom and pop store. And then forced busing came around, and I saw how
riots and the fights.
And I remember how government inspired all that and motivated all that. Mm-hmm. People make conscious choices to do right or wrong, but it's a lot easier when these governments sitting back and just watching. We'll see what happens. And you saw the black and whites who are probably not much better off, fighting each other, when the real problem was what was happening in Washington, D.C. and the politicians, and local politicians as well.
Exactly.
So I guess I was always a conservative-minded person, and I'm raised that way.
And you had religious background too in your family?
Yeah, we went to a congregational church that was probably more moderate. Mm-hmm. Today they're very, very liberal. But I've embraced, I'm a Christian, I would call myself a.
Yeah, but my grandmother was Catholic, but my mother, she leaned more towards the Protestant side. So I had not a strict Protestant upbringing, but it was in our house. It was all over the place as I was.
But you see,
But even still, I ended up being a liberal I remember in high school and stuff. Very, very leftist, very liberal, not communist, just liberal, just Democrat, you know what I'm saying? Believe me, I understood communism, I wasn't a fan of communism at all ever in my life, but I was always voting the party ticket, you know what I'm saying? And I think it was...
You like Jimmy Carter?
Yeah, Jimmy Carter I was too young to vote for him, but I was a big Carter fan.
Mondale?
Mondale, it was the Mondale election that I was 18 and able to vote. I voted for Mondale. It was.
You're forgiven.
But I know, but what I'm saying is, it happened in the Gulf War. I think when the Gulf War happened in 91, that really changed it for me because I started hearing everyone screaming and yelling about, oh, it's a war for oil, and oh, our military, and then getting down on we don't know how to fight in the desert, you know, we don't have the parts, and it's never going to work. That's all I kept hearing was how horrible America was. We're going to lose. It's turning into another Vietnam, and that was the trigger that changed it. Also, the fact that I got a divorce at the time, and being a male in the state of Massachusetts, I ended up getting screwed. Now here I am being a liberal my whole life, standing up for equality and rights and everything else, and I'm watching our troops get land-based halfway across the world, and I'm getting land-based in the courtroom. So I was like, you know what, I've been playing for the wrong team the whole time.
Well, that's good. Sometimes it takes things like that.
It does.
You know, the old saw about conservatives, a liberal who's loved. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, let me recommend some things.
Sure, go ahead. We're going to wrap this up.
We have a lot of reprints, and most of these available on our website, jbs.org. One of them is the article, Levin's Risky Proposal, that came out in the summer of 2013. We've been using this reprint to help educate elected officials, and it should be used for anybody. Then, Nullification versus the Constitutional Convention, How to Save a Republic Through Nullification. It's about an eight-page article written by Joe Wolverton.
That's all in the new